The first time I saw the silver BMW blocking my driveway, I actually thought it was a delivery driver. You know, one of those quick Amazon stops where they toss your package at the gate and disappear before your dog can bark. Except this one wasn't moving. The engine was off. The driver's door was open, music was playing, and a lanky teenager was scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. My place. I walked out with a polite wave, expecting him to jump up, apologize, and move. Instead, he looked me up and down and said, "Oh, sorry, bro, Mom said I could park here." HOA said it's fine. I blinked. Hoa? His mom? There were a lot of words in that sentence that shouldn't have been there. "Your mom," I said slowly, "is Karen from across the street, right?" "Yeah," he said proudly, tossing his keys up and catching them. "She's on the HOA board. So she kinda runs things here." He smiled like I should be impressed. I wasn't. I'd been living here 6 years, long before the HOA even existed. I'd built this driveway, paid for every inch of concrete myself, and endured countless HOA meetings where Karen, self-proclaimed community standards chair, had declared war on lawn ornaments, colored mailboxes, and even Christmas lights. She was the kind of person who believed rules were weapons and the HOA was her personal kingdom. I kept my tone neutral. "You'll need to move that car. That spot's private property." He shrugged. "Mom said this side is common frontage. You can't block the neighborhood flow." "Neighborhood flow?" I repeated. "It's my driveway, not a river." He chuckled, put in his earbuds, and strolled off toward Karen's house. The BMW stayed. That night, I left a note on his windshield. It was polite, straightforward, and handwritten. No printed threats or caps lock rage. "Private driveway. Please do not park here again." The next morning, the note was gone. So was my garbage bin. I found it 2 streets over, tipped into a ditch. By day 3, the BMW was back. Same spot, same smug angle. I tried knocking on Karen's door. She answered wearing a neon pink hoodie with HOA Life in sparkly letters and an expression that screamed, "You've interrupted something more important than your existence." "Karen," I began, "your son's car." She cut me off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, my son, Jason. Lovely boy. He's using the spot temporarily until his school parking permit clears." "Karen, that's my driveway." "It's community easement," she replied, parroting some HOA nonsense she'd probably made up last night. "Section 4B of the Residential Access Code. I have it printed if you'd like to read." I already knew Section 4B. It applied to shared access alleys, not private driveways. But arguing with Karen was like arguing with a storm drain. You could pour logic into it all day, and it would still just gurgle and spit back nonsense. "All right," I said finally, "but if his car's still there by tomorrow, I'll have to get it towed." Her expression hardened. "You wouldn't dare. The HOA has rights." "The HOA doesn't own my driveway." She smirked. "We'll see." That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the streetlights shimmer across the BMW's hood. Jason had backed it in crooked, the rear wheel just grazing my flower bed. I thought about the last time I'd seen Karen pull a stunt like this. She'd once tried to fine old Mr. Delaney for using non-regulation gravel. The man was 92. He'd been scattering that same gravel since the Reagan administration. Karen didn't care. She needed control like most people need oxygen. The next morning, the BMW was still there. I called the HOA hotline, a number Karen herself managed. No answer. I emailed the HOA address. No reply. I finally called the county parking enforcement line, and they laughed. "Private property? We can't touch it," the officer said. "Call a tow company." So I did. But as luck would have it, Karen had already anticipated that move. When the tow truck arrived, she came marching across the street, bathrobe fluttering, shouting, "Unauthorized tow! HOA violation! Illegal removal of community vehicle!" She stood in front of the truck like some suburban Rosa Parks of parking right. The driver looked at me helplessly. "Sir, I can't touch it if she's obstructing," he said. Karen smirked at me over her shoulder. "See? HOA protects its members." The tow truck left. Karen stayed just long enough to snap photos of my house, for documentation purposes. By that afternoon, I had a warning letter in my mailbox accusing me of harassment and obstruction of community access. It had the HOA letterhead and Karen's signature. For the next week, the BMW became a fixture. Every morning, Jason would stroll out, climb into it, blast his stereo, and drive off for a few hours. Every evening, he'd park it right back in my spot, sometimes even closer to my garage door. I tried every angle, reasoning, polite requests, even documenting. Karen loved that. She'd wave from her porch and yell, "Make sure you get my good side." I knew I couldn't outscream her, but I could outthink her. I spent the next 2 nights reading HOA bylaws, county property codes, and even state-level parking statute. Then I found something interesting. Section 17C of the County Residential Code stated that any vehicle left stationary on private property without permission could be declared abandoned after 72 hours, and removed by the property owner. I started my timer. On the 3rd night, Jason came home late, music blaring. I watched from my living room as he parked, tossed his hoodie on the dashboard, and disappeared inside. Midnight struck. I smiled, walked outside, and made a single call. The next morning, the BMW was gone. I was sipping coffee when Karen burst across the street like a hurricane in slippers. "Where is it?" she shrieked. "Where's what?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Jason's car. The BMW. It's gone." "Oh," I said, pretending to think. "You mean the one parked illegally in my driveway for over a week?" Her jaw clenched. "You had no right." "County Ordinance 17C," I said calmly. "Abandoned vehicle on private property. Removed by authorized contractor at 12:04 a.m. Her face turned redder than her robe. You'll pay for this. That was a new car. Do you know how expensive towing is?" "Not as expensive as parking tickets," I replied. She stormed off, screaming into her phone. Within hours, my phone buzzed with calls from HOA board members, or, as I like to call them, Karen's minions. They demanded explanations, meetings, apologies. I gave them none. Instead, I emailed copies of the ordinance, time-stamped photos, and the tow receipt. By sunset, Karen was still pacing her lawn, phone glued to her ear, voice sharp enough to slice the air. Jason hadn't come out all day. The neighborhood was buzzing. Apparently, the tow yard had refused to release the car without proof of ownership, and since the BMW was registered in Karen's name, insurance trick, apparently, she was now tangled in her own paperwork mess. When she finally looked across the street at me, I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. She didn't wave back. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen never lost quietly. And I had a feeling that, in her mind, this was only round one. By the next morning, the entire cul-de-sac was buzzing like a beehive hit with a lawnmower. I didn't even need to check the neighborhood group chat to know who had lit the fire. Karen's posts always followed the same pattern. All caps, dramatic language, and a heavy use of exclamation marks, like a digital sermon to her loyal followers. This one was titled, "Attention all residents, Property Abuse Alert." She claimed I'd illegally seized her son's vehicle, endangered community harmony, and set a dangerous precedent for private vigilantism. My personal favorite line read, "No neighbor is above the HOA." The comments section had already split into 2 factions, Team Karen and Team Me. Team Karen was mostly her entourage, retirees who liked feeling powerful through meeting minutes, and people who were too afraid to challenge her. Team Me consisted of quiet lurkers who sent me private messages like, "Good for you," and "About time someone stood up to her." Still, I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Karen never fired one shot. She carpet-bombed. Around noon, a white SUV rolled into the street, the HOA president's car. "George, Retired Air Force colonel. Spoke in clipped sentences and smelled faintly of fertilizer. He was one of those men who wore aviator sunglasses like they were standard issue, even in meetings about recycling bins. He stepped out, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon, and made a beeline for my porch. "Morning," he said. "We need to talk." "About the car?" I asked. "About the chaos," he replied. He gestured toward Karen's house, where she stood on the porch pretending to water her plants while eavesdropping like a cartoon villain with a hose. "I've had 6 complaints this morning," George said. "All about your abuse of authority." I almost laughed. "Abuse of authority? I don't have authority. I have a driveway." George's mouth twitched. "Karen says you had no right to tow that car." I handed him a copy of the county ordinance. She was warned. I followed procedure. He scanned the document, nodded slowly, and said, "Legally, you're fine. But HOA politics aren't always about laws. They're about perception. So, you're saying she's angry, not right?" He sighed. "She's both dangerous and loud. And loud wins here." Karen waved cheerfully from her porch, as if she hadn't spent the past hour defaming me in public chat. I raised my coffee cup again. Her smile vanished. That afternoon, the retaliation began. First came the letter, printed on HOA stationery, of course. Notice of violation, unapproved landscaping alteration. Apparently, the small patch of gravel bordering my driveway was non-compliant with community aesthetic guidelines. Never mind that the same gravel had been there for 5 years. Then came another notice, accusing me of noise pollution because my lawnmower operated outside approved hours. It was battery-powered and silent, but facts were irrelevant when Karen had a keyboard. The piece de resistance arrived on day 3, a formal summons to an HOA disciplinary hearing. Karen herself was chairing it. I almost admired her boldness. That night, I found Jason washing a new car. This time, a rust-red Jeep. He smirked as I walked by. "Mom says I can park it wherever I want now. She fixed the rules." "Fixed?" I echoed. "Yeah, new HOA resolution. Temporary youth parking accommodations." He grinned. "She even named it after me, Section J." He wasn't lying. When I checked the HOA portal, there it was. New provision. Section J. Youth residents of HOA families may temporarily use neighboring driveways during permit delays or vehicle transitions. It was dated yesterday. No community vote, no approval process. Just Karen's signature and George's reluctant initials. I had to hand it to her. She didn't just bend rules, she forged them like weapons. The next morning, the Jeep was in my driveway. Again. But this time, I didn't call a tow truck. I took photos, measurements, time-stamped. Then I walked over to the county zoning office, a bland government building where fluorescent lights hummed like mosquitoes. After 2 hours of waiting, I finally spoke to a clerk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Hi," I said, laying down my stack of papers. "I need to confirm property boundaries for enforcement purposes." She scanned my deed and smiled faintly. "Oh, this is clear-cut. You own up to the sidewalk. Driveway's fully private." "Perfect," I said. "Now, what happens if an HOA redefines my driveway as communal space?" She frowned. "They can't. HOA rules can't override county zoning." Exactly the words I needed. When I got home, Karen was pacing her lawn again, barking orders into her phone. Jason was nearby, blasting music from his Jeep like it was a declaration of victory. I didn't say a word. I just printed my new stack of documents, official seals, boundary maps, and a copy of Karen's fraudulent Section J. Then I sent it all to the County Code Compliance Office. By sunset, I got a call from a cheerful inspector named Meredith. "Hi. I'm reviewing your report about unauthorized HOA amendments. Just confirming, they really made up a new section?" "Yep," I said. "Named it after her son." She laughed. "That's creative. Illegal, but creative. 2 days later, Karen got a certified letter from the county. I watched from my window as she read it on her porch, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and fury. The next morning, the Jeep was gone. Jason sulked indoors. And for the first time in weeks, my driveway was empty. But victory never lasts long in Karenland. A week passed quietly, too quietly. Then one morning, I stepped outside to find a giant yellow sign staked in my front yard. Caution: illegal contractor activity under investigation. It had the HOA logo on it, complete with Karen's signature. Before I could even react, she strutted over in her pink jogging suit, pretending to stretch. "Oh, you saw it," she said, smiling sweetly. "We had an anonymous complaint about unlicensed paving work on your driveway. HOA policy requires public notice during investigation." "Anonymous complaint?" I asked. She winked. "Rules are rules." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Karen, if you don't remove that sign, I'll report you for harassment." "Oh, go ahead," she said, grinning. The HOA loves transparency. The sign stayed up for 3 days. Then, mysteriously, someone spray-painted "No HOA Tyrants" across it in bright red letters. Karen blamed me, of course. I hadn't even left my property that night. Still, she posted photos online, demanding my expulsion from the community board. She even claimed I was inciting vandalism. That was when George finally called again. "She's gone too far," he said quietly. "The county's breathing down her neck. We're having an emergency board meeting. I'd like you to attend." When I arrived at the clubhouse, Karen was already there, sitting at the head of the table like a queen on trial. Her smile was all venom and perfume. George looked exhausted. 2 other board members avoided eye contact. "Let's get this over with," Karen said. "Mr. Wilson here violated multiple HOA standards, harassed my son, and disrespected this community." George cleared his throat. "Actually, we're here to discuss your unauthorized amendments, Karen." Her smile faltered. "What?" "The county notified us of your Section J. It's illegal. You can't invent bylaws without a vote." Karen's jaw tightened. "It was a temporary measure for fairness." "Fairness doesn't involve forging board approval," George said. "You're suspended from chair duties pending review." The silence that followed was glorious. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think this is over? You're not the hero here. You're just another bully hiding behind paperwork." I met her gaze evenly. "Maybe. But at least my paperwork's real." She stormed out. The meeting adjourned. I went home and poured myself a drink, thinking it was finally done. But as I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something new: faint tire tracks leading up my driveway, stopping just short of the garage. The next morning, the tracks were gone. But my motion light camera showed something chilling. At 2:17 a.m., a familiar red Jeep had rolled halfway up my drive, headlights off, paused for 30 seconds, then reversed and disappeared into the night. Karen wasn't just angry anymore. She was planning something. And this time, she was doing it in the dark. The morning after I caught that Jeep on camera, something in the air felt different. Not just quiet, loaded. The kind of silence before a thunderstorm, when the sky looks calm but every gust of wind feels like a warning. I made coffee, sat on my porch, and re-watched the footage. Jason's Jeep had crept up my driveway, headlights off, paused for half a minute, then rolled back down the hill. No one got out. No damage done. Just a test. That's when I realized Karen had shifted tactics. She wasn't going to fight me in the daylight anymore. She was probing, looking for weak spots, gauging my reaction. Classic escalation: when the entitled lose control, they don't stop, they get creative. I sent the footage to myself and backed it up in 3 places. I wasn't going to make the rookie mistake of losing evidence. Then, out of sheer curiosity, I set up 2 additional cameras. One over the garage, one hidden in the flower bed, and wired a motion sensor light to trigger automatically if anyone stepped within 6 feet of the driveway. By the following night, the sensor went off twice. The first was a raccoon. The second was at 1:43 a.m. I checked the feed the next morning. Karen herself, in pajamas, barefoot, hair tied up, standing at the edge of my driveway holding what looked like a measuring tape. She stretched it across the concrete, wrote something on a clipboard, and muttered to herself. At one point she even crouched down, touching the line where my driveway met the street. Then she looked directly at my camera, almost like she knew it was there, and smiled. That smile wasn't victory. It was promise. By noon, I got an email from the HOA. Subject line: Boundary Clarification Request, Pending Investigation. It was written, of course, by Karen. She claimed there was reasonable doubt about the true length of my driveway, suggesting it might extend into shared easement territory. She even attached a sketch, a crude diagram with a dotted line that somehow shrank my driveway by 2 feet. George called me 5 minutes later. "Ignore it," he said wearily. "She's fishing. We're auditing her behavior after last week's suspension." "Then why does she still have access to HOA letterhead?" I asked. He sighed. "Because she made the letterhead." The woman was unstoppable. That evening, as if on cue, Jason's Jeep returned, parked not in my driveway, but directly in front of it, blocking half the entrance. Legally clever, physically infuriating. I couldn't tow it now, it was on the street. I couldn't even call the county without looking petty. But I could still play. I waited until he left for school the next morning, then took a roll of bright orange construction tape, the kind that says, "Caution, Work Zone," and lined the entire edge of my property. Then I printed a laminated sign, "Private Survey in Progress, Do Not Cross." Within hours, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing again. Karen stormed over, phone in hand, camera rolling. "What is this?" she demanded, gesturing at the tape. "A boundary survey," I said casually. "Since you're so interested in measurements, I figured we'd settle it with official documentation." Her face tightened. "You can't just put up fake signs to intimidate neighbors." "Oh, they're not fake," I said, holding up my phone. "County inspectors scheduled tomorrow morning. Real survey, real stakes." Her eyes flickered. "That's harassment." "No," I said calmly. "That's due process." She stormed off muttering something about filing counterclaims. But the funniest part? I hadn't called anyone yet. The surveyor appointment didn't exist, at least not until that moment. I actually scheduled one later that afternoon just to make it true retroactively. By sunset, Karen had moved her car right next to my property line, half a tire on the grass, as if daring me to react. I didn't take the bait. I just recorded everything, the placement, the timestamps, her yelling, "This is all community property anyway," at a passing jogger who didn't even stop. At 9 a.m. sharp the next morning, a real survey truck pulled up. Karen's face when she saw it was pure cinematic gold. She came marching out in slippers shouting, "Who authorized this?" The surveyor, a bored-looking guy in his 50s, just pointed at me. "The property owner." She sputtered, "I am the property board." He didn't even look up. "Ma'am, we're just measuring." It took them an hour to confirm what I already knew. The property line was exactly where I'd said it was. They gave me an official report, complete with seals and signatures. I printed 5 copies. That night, Karen posted a 4-paragraph rant online titled, "The Truth About Driveway Lies." She accused me of weaponizing bureaucracy, claimed the survey was tampered with, and hinted at spiritual corruption in the neighborhood. I didn't respond publicly, but I did screenshot every word. Then, about 2 days later, the real fireworks started. At 2:11 a.m., the motion light went off again. This time, it wasn't just Karen or Jason. There were 2 figures, Karen in her robe again and Jason holding a bucket. They tiptoed up the driveway, whispering. Then Jason poured something dark and sticky along the base of my garage door. Karen whispered something, pointed, and they both ran off. I didn't even check until morning. When I did, I nearly laughed. Motor oil. A whole gallon of it, poured neatly across the threshold. It hadn't caused any damage, just a slick mess that I cleaned in 5 minutes. But that wasn't the point. She was escalating from harassment to sabotage. I saved the footage and drove straight to the police station. The desk officer, young, tired, clearly familiar with suburban drama, watched the video and sighed. "Yep," he said. "That's vandalism. We can file a report." "Can you do more than that?" I asked. He hesitated. "Not unless there's damage or a threat. But a report helps build a record." "Perfect," I said. "That's all I need." I filed it, got the incident number, and sent copies to the HOA board and county compliance. No commentary, just the evidence. Within hours, the chat group exploded. Karen went into full defense mode, calling the video deepfake manipulation and accusing me of surveillance obsession. George, to his credit, posted one line: "Video verified. Police report confirmed." That silence afterward? Pure bliss. Jason stopped driving past my house after that. The Jeep disappeared for a few days. I thought maybe, just maybe, things had cooled. But Karen wasn't done losing. She was regrouping. One evening, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my mailbox. It was stamped, "Notice of Fine, Excessive Security Installations." The HOA was fining me $250 for unauthorized surveillance cameras visible from public view. I couldn't help laughing. Karen had turned my own evidence into a new weapon. That night, I drafted a letter to the county HOA compliance officer, attaching the same vandalism footage, police report, and the new fine notice. I asked one simple question: is it legal for an HOA member under investigation to issue fines using suspended authority? The reply came within hours: absolutely not. Please forward all related documents for state-level review. That's when I realized I'd stopped playing defense. Karen thought she was wearing me down. She didn't realize I was quietly building a case that could strip her of every ounce of control she'd ever had. A few nights later, I stepped outside to take the trash out and saw her standing at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, watching me. The streetlight flickered between us. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. But in that silence, the war lines were clear. By the end of that week, county enforcement had launched a formal audit of the HOA's conduct. Rumors spread fast: misuse of funds, unauthorized amendments, personal targeting. Karen's name was on every page. Jason's Jeep never reappeared. But I noticed something else instead: faint white paint marks near my driveway curb. Survey paint. Someone had tried to redraw the boundary again, at night. I smiled, went inside, and pulled out my folder. I already had everything I needed: timestamps, photos, reports, and a tidy trail of her own arrogance. Karen had started this fight with a parking spot. I was going to finish it with paperwork. By the time the county audit began, the neighborhood felt like a courtroom with manicured lawns. Everyone was whispering, not about politics or property values this time, but about Karen. She had been queen of this subdivision for nearly a decade, the self-appointed enforcer of rules that didn't exist. Now, for the first time, she was being investigated under them. I started noticing subtle changes. The HOA newsletter, once filled with Karen's reminders about mailbox heights and garbage bin etiquette, arrived late. The usual morning gossip circle in front of her house had evaporated. Even the woman who walked her poodle past my driveway every day suddenly crossed to the other side of the street, as if even proximity to Karen could summon drama. The audit itself was quiet, methodical, and painfully slow. County investigators sent notices, collected documents, and scheduled interviews with board members. I didn't have to lift a finger. Everything was moving under its own legal momentum. But that silence only made Karen more desperate. The first sign of her panic came in the form of friendliness. One morning, she knocked on my door. When I opened it, she was smiling too wide, holding a tray of cookies. I thought we should talk, she said. Neighbor to neighbor. The last time she'd smiled like that was when she'd fined Mr. Delaney for wind chimes. Sure, I said cautiously. She stepped inside, scanning my living room as if evaluating my decor for violations. This whole thing's gotten out of hand, hasn't it? She said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. All the paperwork, the county, the drama. You started most of it, I said, not unkindly. Her smile froze. That's your version of events. Karen, I said, there's video evidence of you pouring motor oil on my driveway. She waved a hand. It was dark. Things can look different at night. Besides, I've spoken to a lawyer, and he says you might be guilty of harassment, recording people without consent. I raised an eyebrow. Security cameras on my own property aren't harassment. Well, that's debatable, she said breezily. Anyway, I was thinking, maybe we should reset. Forget the past, move on. I leaned against the counter. By reset, you mean you stop getting investigated? Her eyes flicked up, and for a second the mask slipped. You don't understand. I built this community. I keep it from falling apart. Without order, this place would look like chaos. Like, she gestured vaguely toward my driveway. Like that. You mean my driveway? She sighed dramatically. You're impossible. Then she set the cookie tray on the table, and walked out without another word. The next morning, the cookies were gone, replaced by a notice taped to my door. Unauthorized construction activity. Stop work order. The accusation this time? Unauthorized grading. Apparently, my driveway counted as an ongoing alteration. She hadn't even waited 24 hours to fire back. But now her moves were sloppy. The county already had jurisdiction, and Karen's own suspension barred her from issuing notices. I forwarded the photo to Meredith, the investigator. Her reply was short and brutal. That's retaliation. Noted. That word, noted, became my favorite part of the entire ordeal. Every petty stunt Karen pulled was another nail in her own coffin, hammered quietly by her own hand. A week later, the county held a public hearing at the community center. I hadn't planned on going, but George called and asked me to attend. She's bringing witnesses, he said grimly. You might want to be there to correct the fiction. The room was packed. Folding chairs, stale coffee, fluorescent lighting. Karen sat front and center, flanked by Jason and 2 loyal board members. When the investigator called her name, she rose like a defendant in a drama she thought she could still direct. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier as she spoke. I've dedicated 10 years to this neighborhood. I've enforced standards, maintained harmony, and volunteered more hours than anyone else here. And now, because of one man's vendetta, my reputation is being dragged through the mud. She gestured toward me. Half the room turned. He's manipulated footage, misrepresented the rules, and coordinated with outside agencies to destroy our HOA from within. The investigator cleared her throat. Mrs. Price, the evidence shows you unilaterally amended bylaws, falsified board approvals, and issued fines under suspension. Karen smiled sweetly. Paperwork can be misread. Then Meredith produced a binder thick enough to stun a bear. We didn't misread these. She opened it, and page by page, Karen's empire crumbled. Fake signatures, duplicate invoices, personal reimbursements for HOA supplies that included beauty salon receipt. The murmurs in the room turned to gasps. Jason slumped lower in his seat. One of the board members quietly excused himself. Karen, cornered but still defiant, said, "This is all administrative error. If we tear down volunteers for small mistakes, who'll run our communities?" Meredith closed the binder. "We'll find someone who can read." The laughter that rippled through the room was the first sound of collective relief I'd heard in months. Karen's face flushed crimson. She turned toward me, eyes glinting. "This isn't over," she whispered. She was right. 2 nights later, my security lights caught movement again. This time, it wasn't oil. It was spray paint. I woke up to find the side of my garage defaced with the words, "Tow this," in jagged black letters. I filed another police report. Karen denied everything, of course, but Jason's handwriting matched the graffiti too neatly to be coincidence. He must have done it while she stood watch. The officer didn't arrest him. Minor vandalism, no witnesses, but the report was another addition to the ever-growing file with her name on it. The next week, the county officially dissolved the HOA board pending re-election. George resigned immediately. Karen was barred from running again. Her reign was over, at least officially. But I knew she wouldn't accept defeat quietly. 2 days after the announcement, I found a "for sale" sign staked in her front yard. The gossip spread faster than fertilizer. Karen's moving. Some neighbors celebrated. Others pretended to be sad. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't leaving so much as retreating. I was right again. That evening, Jason's Jeep returned, but this time he parked directly across my driveway and left the engine running. He sat inside, staring at my house, music thumping. I ignored him for 5 minutes, then 10. When it hit 15, I walked outside. "Something you need?" I asked. He smirked. "Just saying goodbye. To me or to your mom's career in community dictatorship?" He chuckled but didn't look away. "You think you won? She's got friends higher up than you know. You'll see." Then he revved the engine, tires screeching as he sped off down the street. The next morning, Karen's house looked empty. Curtains drawn. Lawn unkempt. Her Lexus gone. The neighborhood felt cleaner, lighter. Still, part of me didn't trust it. People like her didn't just vanish. They regrouped. They planned. I started hearing things. A rumor she'd filed an appeal with the county. A whisper that she'd complained to a local TV station about harassment by corrupt officials. Even a report that she was starting a Neighborhood Freedom Alliance, an anti-HOA Facebook group for victims of systemic property control. I almost admired her persistence. Then one night, just as I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed. A notification from my front camera, motion detected. I checked the feed and froze. There she was, Karen, standing at the end of my driveway, hair disheveled, face pale under the streetlight, holding something in her hand, a piece of paper. She stared straight into the camera for 10 long seconds, then dropped the paper on the ground and walked away. When I went outside, the night was silent except for the soft hum of the distant power lines. The paper fluttered against my shoe. It wasn't a letter. It was a printed screenshot of my security footage, the same clip where she and Jason poured oil on my driveway. Across the top, in bold marker, she'd written 2 words. "Try me." I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, more like the kind of adrenaline that comes from realizing you're in the final act of a long, absurd play. Karen's note wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. She wasn't gone. She was circling back, one last desperate attempt to reclaim the crown she'd lost. At sunrise, I walked down the driveway with my coffee, half expecting to see her still standing there. But she wasn't. Just the faint tire marks from her Lexus and that paper she'd left behind. I took it inside, scanned it for fingerprints. Not that I'd need them, but documenting every step had become second nature now. It wasn't about paranoia anymore, it was about closure. By noon, Meredith from County Enforcement called. "We got your message," she said. "Karen filed an appeal, and a harassment complaint against you." I almost laughed. Of course she did. She's claiming you manipulated footage, falsified property records, and conducted a slander campaign through digital means. We're legally obligated to follow up, but her tone softened. Between us? The board's already closed the case on her end. There's no legal ground left to stand on. Does she know that? I asked. She will by tomorrow. I hung up, but something in Meredith's tone nagged at me. People like Karen didn't care about being right anymore, they cared about being loud. If she couldn't win through rules, she'd win through noise. That afternoon, it started again. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes around the neighborhood. Beware of fraudulent neighbor. The paper accused me of manipulating local authorities and causing distress to a community volunteer. No signature, but the font screamed Karen. She'd even used the same clip art HOA logo she always loved, a tiny picket fence in a circle like a badge of self-importance. I picked one up, took a picture, and sent it to Meredith. Her reply came fast. "We'll handle it. Please don't engage." But ignoring Karen was like ignoring termites. The longer you pretended they weren't there, the more they chewed. That night, Jason came back. Not in the Jeep, in a black pickup with tinted windows. He parked 2 houses down and idled for 10 minutes, engine rumbling like a growl. My motion light flicked on. He backed up a few feet, still watching. I didn't move. I just stood at my window, camera in hand, recording everything. Eventually, he drove off. By the next morning, my mailbox was gone. Not knocked over, gone. Just the post, a fresh hole in the ground where it used to stand. I knew exactly who'd done it, but proving it would be tricky. I still filed the report anyway. The officer, the same one from before, just shook his head. "You've got the most dedicated enemies I've ever seen," he said. I smiled grimly. "You don't know the half of it." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I went to visit Karen's house. Her "for sale" sign was still up, but the curtains were open. The place looked abandoned, except for a faint flicker of light from inside. I rang the bell. No answer. I waited 30 seconds, then turned to leave. That's when I heard her voice through the window. "You can't take everything from me," she snapped. A pause. Then Jason's voice. "Mom, it's over." Her reply was sharp and broken all at once. "It's not over until he pays." I didn't stay to listen. That night, I made my own final move. I compiled everything. The footage, the reports, the screenshots, even the flyers, into one neatly organized folder labeled HOA Karen Case. Then I sent it to 3 recipients: the county district attorney's office, the local paper, and Meredith. I didn't include commentary. Just the facts. Facts that spoke louder than any rant. 2 days later, it hit the news. Not front-page scandal level, more like the quiet kind of justice that lives on page 3 of the local section, under Community Affairs. The headline read, "Former HOA Chair under investigation for misuse of authority and harassment allegations." The article was short but effective. It listed every documented offense, every audit finding, every county complaint. My name wasn't mentioned, just a local resident. But everyone in the neighborhood knew. By noon, Karen's "for sale" sign was gone. By evening, her house was empty. The curtains drawn for good this time. I thought that was the end of it. Until the letter arrived. No envelope, just folded paper slipped under my door. Handwritten in her sharp cursive. "You think you've won, but you don't understand what winning costs. When you build your life on rules, you forget that people make the rules. I'll always find a way around them." No signature. Just a smudge of perfume and a faint crease where her pen had pressed too hard. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because in a way she was right. Winning had cost something. Time, peace, sleep, trust in the idea that adults could act like adults. But it also gave something back, quiet. 3 weeks passed. The neighborhood slowly reset itself. The HOA reformed under new leadership. A mild-mannered guy named Luis, who actually believed in helping people instead of punishing them. He knocked on my door once, offering to return the fines I'd been charged under Karen's tenure. I told him to donate it to the community garden instead. Even Jason vanished from the radar. Someone said he'd taken a job out of state. Someone else said Karen had followed him. Either way, her Lexus was gone, the HOA Life hoodie was gone, and for the first time in years, the street didn't feel like it was under surveillance. Then one night, I heard tires screech outside. I looked out the window, a black pickup, the same one Jason had used. It wasn't stopping. It was speeding past, fishtailing as it turned the corner. Behind it, flashing red and blue lights. Police. I watched from my porch as they chased it down the hill, sirens slicing the night air. The sound faded, then silence. The next morning, I got the news from George. They caught Jason, he said quietly. Drunk driving. Tried to run from them. Said he was defending his mom's honor. Is she with him? I asked. He shook his head. No one's seen her. Rumor is she left the state before the story broke. For a moment I felt a strange emptiness, like the villain had exited the stage, but the play wasn't quite ready to end. Later that day, a county envelope arrived in my mail, official seal, formal letterhead. Inside was a single sheet, confirmation that the HOA investigation was closed. All complaints resolved. HOA restructuring completed. No further action required. Underneath was a small handwritten note from Meredith. Congratulations. You outlasted her. I folded it neatly and placed it in the folder with everything else. The Karen Archive, I called it. Proof that even the loudest tyranny eventually collapses under its own noise. For weeks after that, I still half expected something to happen. A knock at the door, a new letter, a car parked crookedly in my drive. But none of it came. The neighborhood was normal again, if you could call it that. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers hissed, and the world kept turning. It wasn't until a month later, when I was cleaning the garage, that I noticed something odd. Tucked between two storage bins was an envelope I didn't recognize. No stamp, no name, just my address, written in that same looping cursive. I opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. My driveway. Taken at night. And in the bottom corner, a shadow, faint but unmistakable, of someone holding a phone. No note this time. No perfume. Just the picture. I stared at it for a long time before putting it back in the folder with everything else. Then I locked the cabinet. Karen was gone. But somehow the idea of her, the control, the entitlement, the need to be seen, lingered. Like the echo of a doorbell after no one's there. Still, when I stepped outside that evening and saw the empty driveway gleaming under the streetlight, I couldn't help smiling. After all, that spot was finally mine again. Peace has a strange sound. It's not silence, it's absence. No complaints in the mailbox. No headlights creeping up the driveway at 2 a.m. No smug HOA memos taped to the door. Just the steady hum of sprinklers, the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog, and the low rustle of leaves in the morning wind. For the first time in years, I could breathe without scanning the horizon for pink hoodies and clipboards. A month had passed since the Polaroid incident, and life had found its rhythm again. Meredith had closed the case. The new HOA president, Luis, had already started repainting the community sign and planting flowers where Karen used to plant warnings. George had retired for real this time, claiming he'd had enough suburban warfare for one lifetime. Me? I'd gone back to my quiet rituals. Coffee at dawn. Evening walks around the cul-de-sac. I even repainted my mailbox, a small but satisfying symbol of reclaimed territory. I thought the war was over. But like every storm, there's always that last distant rumble. It came one Thursday morning in the form of a delivery van. The driver knocked and handed me a large brown envelope. No return address. Just a printed label. HOA records request enclosed. Inside was a USB drive. No letter, no signature. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting a virus, half expecting another Karen-style stunt. Instead, there were 3 video files labeled Evidence 1, Evidence 2, and Evidence 3. The first was surveillance footage, grainy black and white. It showed Karen's house the night before she disappeared. A car pulled up around 1 a.m., not her Lexus, but a dark SUV. Someone got out, walked to her door, and knocked. She answered, wearing her robe. The visitor handed her a folder, then left. The second video was from a traffic camera on the highway 2 nights later. The same SUV, this time towing a small trailer. License plate barely visible, but the timestamp matched the night she'd supposedly left town. The third video froze me. It was mine, my own driveway footage, but zoomed in and cropped differently. Someone had accessed my camera remotely. The video stopped right at the moment I'd found the Polaroid weeks ago. My stomach sank. Whoever sent this wanted me to know. Karen wasn't done playing. I called Meredith immediately. She sounded alert, the way cops do when something clicks. "That SUV matches a vehicle from one of our open cases," she said. "Private investigator, hired under her name 2 days before she left. She must have hired someone to collect material on you after she lost." "So she's still out there?" I asked. "Maybe. Or she's trying to make you think she is." That distinction didn't comfort me much. 2 nights later, my motion sensor tripped again. I looked at the feed expecting another shadow, but this time it was a man, short, balding, wearing a reflective vest. He placed something small on the edge of my driveway, looked around, then left. When I went outside, there was a business card weighed down by a rock. McCarthy and Associates, Private Investigations. On the back, "We should talk." I met him the next morning at a diner downtown. He introduced himself as Alan McCarthy, the owner of the agency. Middle-aged, polite, with the kind of tired eyes that come from dealing with too many domestic disputes and unpaid debt. "She hired us about 2 months ago," he said, stirring his coffee. "Told us you were harassing her and fabricating digital evidence. Wanted us to dig into your background, financials, whatever could discredit you." I nodded slowly. "Let me guess, she didn't pay." He chuckled. "Half up front, nothing after the first report. Then she disappeared. No forwarding address, no contact info. We still had her file, figured you might want to see it before we hand it to the county." He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were printouts, copies of my property tax records, screenshots of the HOA chat logs, and one photo of me standing by my mailbox, time-stamped from a month ago. "She was watching you," he said. "Or paying someone to. What do you think she wanted?" He leaned back. "Control. Same thing they all want. But she was different, talked about you like you'd stolen something intangible. Not money, not property, order." That word hit hard. Order. Karen's obsession. The need to be the axis around which everyone else spun. I thanked him, paid for his coffee, and walked out into the parking lot with the folder under my arm. The sun was blinding, but all I could see was her handwriting in my head. "Try me." When I got home, I opened the folder again and found one last document at the bottom, a printed receipt for a P.O. box registered under her name, 3 towns over. Part of me wanted to leave it alone. The sane part. But sanity and closure rarely coexist. The next day, I drove out there. The post office was small, tucked beside a laundromat. Box 214. The clerk said it had been inactive for weeks but still contained mail. I asked if I could check it, showed my police report and ID. She hesitated, then called her supervisor. After a short conversation, she handed me a small stack of envelopes. Most were junk, magazines, old HOA flyers, one letter from a realtor. But at the very back was a sealed manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a flash drive. The note read, "You like evidence? Here's some of mine." The flash drive contained a single video. It opened with Karen's face, recorded selfie style, in her living room, hair disheveled but eyes sharp. "If you're watching this," she said, "then they've already buried my side. You've all turned me into a villain because it's easier than admitting you like rules until they inconvenience you. You wanted freedom. Now you can have chaos." She laughed bitterly. "I know you'll find this, Wilson. You're predictable like that. So I left you something. Let's see if you're still the clever one when the balance tips the other way." The video ended abruptly. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen. She was unhinged, but methodical. The kind of person who didn't bluff, she orchestrated. When I got home, I checked my cameras again. Everything seemed normal. No movement. No notes. Just stillness. But when I walked to the end of the driveway, I noticed something I'd missed earlier: faint white powder scattered across the concrete in a narrow line. I crouched, touched it, and realized it wasn't paint. Salt. I called the police again. They sent an officer to test it. Just plain rock salt, nothing dangerous. Probably symbolic. Karen's version of a curse, a last dramatic gesture to remind me she still existed somewhere out there. For a while, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or lock my doors twice. In the following weeks, nothing happened. The case faded, the headlines disappeared, and life went on. I mowed the lawn, repainted the porch, even started nodding to neighbors again. But the folder with her video stayed on my desk, unopened except for the occasional glance, like a relic from a war I'd barely survived. Then one evening, a new family moved into Karen's old house. A young couple with 2 kids and a Labrador. They waved when they saw me, cheerful and unsuspecting. For a moment I wanted to warn them, but the words stuck. That night, I stood by my window, watching their moving truck back into the driveway. The headlights swept across the lawn, and for a brief second I saw it. A reflection. In the upper window of Karen's old house. A flash of pink fabric. It could have been a curtain. Could have been nothing. But deep down, I knew better. People like Karen never really leave. They linger, in bylaws, in gossip, in the tiny fears that make normal people doubt themselves. The next morning, I dropped the entire folder off at the county archive with a simple note: for public record. Closure achieved. And for the first time since this all began, I parked my car in the middle of my driveway, locked the door, and walked away without looking back. I didn't need cameras anymore. If Karen wanted to haunt the place, let her. Because even ghosts can't break county code.